Jest.
Dobra, to zaczniemy. Witam wszystkich, tych, których znam i których nie znam. Ja jestem koordynatorem Koduj dla Polski i też prowadzę tę społeczność. O Kodu nie będę mówił, dla chętnych możecie zostać po Marii i porozmawiać możemy o Kodu, jak ktoś jest zainteresowany większym zaangażowaniem się lub chce się dowiedzieć, jak działamy. Dzisiaj mamy fajne, specjalne wydarzenie z TechSoupem, które nas jak co tydzień gości, ale też czasem organizujemy jakieś wspólne wydarzenia, bo mamy podobnymi wartościami się kierujemy i Civic jest dla nas bardzo ważny. Jest Marnie Webb ze studia Caravan Studios z Stanów, która robi niesamowite projekty społeczne i im się udaje, bo nam różnie. Więc dzisiaj posłuchamy właśnie o tym, jak im się udaje, ale też może o porażkach. I oddaję głos Marii i Karolinie z TechSoup.
Cześć, to jeszcze się przedstawię dla tych, którzy są tutaj po raz pierwszy. Jestem Karo, bywam tutaj zwykle co tydzień, pracuję w TechSoupie, czyli w tej organizacji, która gości te spotkania, które, tak jak Wojtek miło wspomniał, odbywają się co tydzień. TechSoup to jest taka organizacja, która ma misję wspierania innych organizacji. Część z Was może już kojarzyć nasz program dotacyjny, czyli prowadzimy dotacje sprzętu i oprogramowania dla organizacji pozarządowych, bibliotek i muzeów w bardzo atrakcyjnych cenach, jak 10-20% wartości rynkowej. Oferujemy też różnego typu szkolenia, tam widzicie ogłoszenia na przykład chyba z Google Adsów szkolenia. Ja pracuję w zespole, który realizuje międzynarodowe projekty społeczne, stąd często współpracujemy właśnie z Koduj dla Polski, między innymi nad projektami związanymi z otwartymi danymi i z aplikacjami społecznymi. Będę pomagać prowadzić dzisiejsze spotkanie i chciałam Was zachęcić do tego, tak się umówiliśmy z nami, żebyście zadawali pytania w trakcie. Czyli żeby to było interaktywne, żeby nie była to taka prezentacja, gdzie nie wiem, czekacie na koniec. Ćwiczyliśmy to wcześniej, bo mieliśmy tutaj już kilka spotkań z Marnie, więc one są zwykle bardzo dynamiczne. W zależności od tego, co Was interesuje, o tym będzie mówić. Więc chciałam tu podkreślić, żebyście się nie krępowali, bo może nie jesteśmy do tego przyzwyczajeni, do takiej formuły, że cały czas jest przerywanie w pół zdania osobie prowadzącej. Właśnie taką formułę byśmy chcieli mieć. Chciałam Was też zachęcić, jeżeli Marnie będzie mówić po angielsku, ale możecie zadawać pytania po polsku, bo zwykle tak jest łatwiej, że słuchając rozumiemy bardzo wiele, natomiast często łatwiej się wyrazić we własnym języku. Ja bardzo chętnie pomogę z tłumaczeniem. I też chciałam Was zachęcić, żebyście przerywali w trakcie, żeby coś przetłumaczyć na polski, żeby się upewnić, czy na pewno dobrze zrozumieliśmy, bo generalnie po to jest to spotkanie, żebyśmy się dobrze zrozumieli. Chcieliśmy je poprowadzić w języku angielskim i tak się zastanawiam, czy to jest dla Was ok, czy chcielibyście mieć przez cały czas tłumaczenie na bieżąco? Jest ok, a obiecujecie, że nie będziecie krępować, przerywać? Możemy zrobić deal? Ok? Dobra. I'm making the deal to interrupt you in the middle of sentences to make it interactive, as we discussed before. So everybody says that it's okay if you speak in English, and I'm also encouraging that we interrupt to repeat in Polish to make sure that we understand it in the same way, since our languages are quite different. So, Marnie, take the floor. We haven't introduced you actually. It was just Wojtek just said that we invited you because your projects work and ours not always. As I told you, it's a voluntary community, so it's like different resources and different ideas. It's also like learning by doing and sometimes trying things for fun. So we are really interested about both successes and the challenges that you are facing with your work.
Man, I understood zero of the previous part. I think I understood my own name. and maybe the word for library, if it's like bibliotech.
Biblioteca,
Okay,
yeah.
so that, I got that. So hi. So a couple more deals. Interrupt me if you don't understand something, and interrupt for questions, right? Because this is a presentation of a bunch of the work that we're doing, and we'll get as far as we get in talking about it. So if something is interesting, or you know, stop. So that's where we spend the time talking. Okay? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so my name is Marnie Webb. I work for TechSoup, based in San Francisco, which is where I live. And I worked for TechSoup for 18 years. So I've been paying attention to this issue of technology in civil society for a long time now. Whenever I started, the discussion was about whether or not nonprofits should have websites. Right, and it's progressed to this place where we're talking about open data and constructing prototypes in weekend events. You know, so there's been a lot of change. About 5 years ago, we at TechSoup we started an organization called Caravan Studios, and we've taken the mission of TechSoup to make sure that all civil society organizations have access to the technology that they need to be able to do their missions and to be able to make the connections and to implement new and innovative technologies, to mean actually working with communities to design, build, and operate technology systems that directly face social issues. So, you know, the work that organizations need to put a CRM in place, or their own data management tools, or donor management tools, that's great, important work that we do not do. The work that we do is all on the other side of their computers. And it's the part that where the technology faces the issue that they're working on. We're often using and contributing to public data sets, which may come from governments or it may come from other sources. And we have a community design process. Over the 5 years that we've been working, we've worked on these projects and products. So right now we have 4 products out in the world being used. We have 2 more that are going to be released next week when we're in, no, the week after next in Brazil. And then we have some sort of other projects on the shelf that we're going out and getting funding for. Just to give you a little bit more organizational context, as a part of TechSoup, we're a nonprofit organization, so most of this work is funded by foundations and government entities. So how do we do this, you might reasonably ask. So we have as every good organization, we have a 5-step design process, because that seems to be what's required. You can see the steps here, but I'm going to go through and describe what they are. So I should say that none of the things we've built have we thought up. None of them happen because we sit in our offices and show each other PowerPoint presentations and convince ourselves that we have really good ideas, and then we make them and get people to use them. We do that, but what happens when we go out is the community kindly tells us that we're stupid, that our ideas will not work, and they give us a bunch of wonderful reasons for them not working that we never could have figured out from inside our office. So this process comes because we're figuring out how we work with the community, right? And how we do, how do we put ourselves in a position where we aren't coming up with ideas, but we're doing what we're good at, which is we're good at facilitating community conversations that result in actionable technology projects. And how do we let the community do what they're good at, which is knowing what they need to be the community they'd like to be? They just may not be able to describe that in technology terms, right? So how do we come up with a process that brings us both together? And so 5 years in, this is what we've come up with. So I'll tell you when we start involving, how many of you here would call yourself a technologist? A coder, a developer, use any of those words that imply that you know what technology is and how to use it, and you're unafraid to do something like
That's a
compile.
very different thing.
Scary.
Huh?
It's a very different thing. You said like first you code and then you're not afraid, and not afraid anymore.
Yeah. No, I was saying not afraid of the word compile. So at the whole first 3 steps of our 5-step process, there are no technologists involved, including me. I would not count myself as a technologist.
Can you say a bit about your team? Like you see,
Sure.
Like,
We have a 6-person team that mostly looks like community organizers and facilitators and product managers. We do QA and testing on our team because we think that's a responsible part of development. But when we get grants, we outsource to do the technology development. And we have the skills to be able to do that well. And we do have people that could do the coding themselves. But we prefer to outsource for a variety of reasons.
and when you outsource things, you're buying services. These are not volunteers.
Correct. Occasionally we work with volunteers, or we might have a group that comes to us and wants to take on a voluntary project. But we plan to pay for the coding because we want it done according to specifications and on a timeline. Right? So that involves money usually. I always think if you think to yourself, gosh, I'm saving $25,000, you're probably in trouble. Right? Because then you're depending on somebody's goodwill and availability, and we've made commitments to the community usually.
Depending on what position.
Yeah. I'm saying usually, not 100% of the time, but we don't depend on volunteers if we've made a commitment to a date for the community and we have funds. We also think it's responsible for us to get money and share it. So we like paying for the skills if we can. So, but at the first 3 steps, there are no technologists involved. Even the technologists that hesitantly raise their hand, just a little bit, aren't involved. So these examples are from a project we've been doing in Brazil. So the first step we bring community members together, experts in specific issue areas, and we generate opportunities for technology interventions. What does that mean? We do some preliminary research to give us an idea of what issue areas are of concern in a city. That includes desk research and informational interviews. Using that, we reach out and invite civil society actors, governments, foundations, academics to attend these events. This particular event, let's see here, Belo Horizonte. This particular event is about issues related to accessing food and food security. You're on television. And food security, and that's the issue that we're talking about. So we just go through and talk to them about the problem during this phase, right? They take the big issue, we work with them to narrow it down, we talk about why it's unsolved in their particular community, because the specifics are different in different places, and we work with them to get to a design question. That's the whole outcome for this, is not coming up with an idea. It's the sticky, hard bit that an idea can hit and work on. The next phase is a design phase. Still, no technologists are there. We start where the previous event left off, and we start with these design questions. The design questions look like let's see if she has hers up there. She has it. Like how might we is how all of our design questions begin, right? And then they fill it in with a degree of specificity about their problem or issue. Then again, working with non-technologists, we facilitate them through coming up with a user profile. Who's the person that's going to use this, that would have to put their fingers on a product, right? To answer this design question. Who's it going to be for? And so we have them design a user profile, and then we take them through a fairly rigorous storyboarding process, actually, where they describe how the user becomes aware of the problem, what they do, how they interact with it, how they share it. They sketch that all out, and then we give them a bunch of construction paper and scissors and glue sticks and things like protractors, and they do stuff like this. And what that is we say, like, okay, imagine the screen on your phone when you're looking at a product and you're deciding to download it or not. That's what we want you to make. Nobody's talking, you don't read about the technology back end on those pages. Those are designed for a user to make a decision about whether this is going to help them or not, right? So that's what they're asking them to do. Almost everybody's familiar with that. It's a concept that people are used to and can engage with. So then they make it, at the end of the event, they pitch it to one another, right? And they describe it. And actually the events are super fun. The adults start out like, this woman is a librarian, and she started out like this, saying, but I don't know about technology, I can't make something. And then she ended up being the person that pitched the product. And we find that to be a pretty universal engagement as people start pretty closed because they think of it as something they can't do, and then they engage and do it. So we take this that they come up with, and we take it back to our office and we turn it into a poster. And we take the poster and we try to preserve as many elements from the design as we can, but while normalizing it, because some people are better at the design bits than other people are, you know, and having some descriptions on it and common colors. This is a different group. You can see pictures from the team that worked on it. Actually, this is interesting. These two gentlemen in this picture met for the first time at this event, came up with this idea. They started a company to make it, and they just got funding from the local government, the state government where this city is, in Minas Gerais, to begin working on this as a product, right? And this is where this came from. Anyhow, we make this poster, and then we take the poster and we print up a whole bunch of them, and we send them out into the community where they will be used. So for us, that often means hanging them in local libraries and things that have to do with food. It may be putting them in local food banks or other places where people that might care about the issue are going to see the poster. That's what we care about. And then around the poster, we have stickers and comment cards. So people can put like a red sticker on posters, things they don't like. They can put a thumbs up sticker, which is a ubiquitous communication. You can have entire conversations in Brazil only using the thumbs up gesture, you know? Like, so that's the sticker they have to put on things that they like. They, the comment cards, people can just write, so each poster has a number on it. They can just write a number on a card and drop it into a box like a vote, or they can fill out and answer a series of questions, or give us even more comments and give us their name, right? So we give them a bunch of ways to engage with this. And then we bring all the information back and we start now analyzing it, right? And based on what we get back, we decide what to make with the funds that we have, which is not the only way stuff gets made, right? Because sometimes the community didn't pick this, but these two young men did, so they started making it.
Do you ever find out that technology is not, like, I don't know how you select the community, but do you ever find out that technology is not the solution or is only part of the solution?
It is,
and then what do you do with that?
Yeah, it is always only part of the solution, right? Because the bigger solution is probably a process and a need to galvanize community will and a change, because there's some unmet need, and the tech is filling a gap, right? So it's almost never all of the solution. We don't, by this point, no, we don't find out that tech isn't a solution because we weed those areas out in the first two sessions. Like the reason for doing those two sessions is to guide us towards opportunities for tech interventions.
And have you ever had a situation when you went to the community and you found out that they could actually do something else?
They can in addition. So we often find out other possible solutions to the problem. But because we're pitching towards tech, we're doing analysis up front. So we go in already fairly confident that we're going to be going in that direction. There have been a couple of issues where which I'll talk about later, that the tech may still be a part of the solution, but there's a big data project that has to happen first. Because you could make the technology, but it wouldn't work because the data that would make it run isn't in the right formats, right? Or it isn't available. Or we've certainly had situations where there's a tech solution, but it's like more expensive than the problem. Like instead of building the tech, you should just turn around and buy whatever it is you need to buy with the money.
Can you give examples? That would be...
Sure. So one of the places in this same project, a community in the south, a different community than these pictures, a community in the south of the country wanted a transit application that told them where the bus was, but that information wasn't in the very particular format, GTFS, that's required for things like Google Maps and transit applications. And also for Google Maps, it has to be submitted by a particular person within the local government, and so that I can't just submit data in the right format and say, this is the bus schedule for Warsaw. You know, like, so it's got routes that it has to go through. So when we started looking at it, the problem wasn't the app. The problem was that the transit information wasn't organized. And then we found out there weren't even printed routes, right? So the first step was to do a community process where we actually worked with volunteers to map the routes and do the work with software that gets it into the right format to be able to do that. So that's an example of the tech has to start with the data. The other example came from a very long time ago, relatively speaking, in our organizational history, where it was a very particular problem-solving event that had to do with a combination of law changes in the United States and the realities of climate change, that had to do with the fact that people that lived in certain houses were suddenly in flood zones that they weren't in when the house got built 100 years ago. Right? That has to do with environmental changes. The combination with the law change meant that all of a sudden they were going to be paying market rate flood insurance for a house they never thought they would have to pay flood insurance on, which is like, can be as much as $20,000 US annually, right? So it's like not insignificant money, especially if you own your house. It tended to be in poor neighborhoods, a bunch of problems. So they were interested in coming up with, like, how do we figure out how to intervene here and do it? And that was a situation which this solution was not likely tech. Like, you could potentially use some pretty sophisticated tech to identify houses at risk, but the solutions were more like legal solutions, eminent domain, the city's coming in and buying these houses back from people and just saying, move someplace that's not a flood zone, you know, like other kind of legal remediations. So what we learned, so that's an example where there was no tech solution. What we learned from that project is how to avoid that. You know, so we do try to avoid that. We're okay if there's got to be data first. You know, sometimes we do these events and there's no like solution that people galvanize around. That's all okay. But we try not to end up in a position where people have we leave people with a hunger to do something and there's no possible next step we can help with. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. So we get all of this feedback back from folks, and we, you know, we analyze it, and it helps us decide where we have a grant, where to put the energies of our grant, which means our time, attention, and the funds that are from the grant. That said, we share all the other stuff that comes out so that other people can do things about it, and that's where volunteers can come in. We have not done, but we're super interested in how do we take that data to local hackathons or other events where people are coming together around some of these issue areas. So we get to the next step, which is developing a project. You see there some of our team and some of the folks that we work with the company. It was when the Hungarian company that we work with quite a bit was visiting us. And so you see some of the technical team there. What we've learned at this spot is that there are three main ways we make products. One is we make them. People in this picture, some other people put their hands in keyboards and we make them, we test them, we prototype them with communities, we release them, we operate and maintain them, right? Very traditional product development life cycle. The other way is that we do research and we find products that are almost what the community wants, and we negotiate with the people that made those to add these features in, and we pay them. So we go to those developers and say, guess what? People in your community really want an application that tells them where recycling is. And you guys have made something that's almost what these people want. By the way, we've uncovered the fact that there's a need for this, not just in your city, but nationally. And so then we work to say, like, which of these features can we build? This is, rather than us taking the grant money and building a new project, let's take the grant money and sort of invest it in your product, where I'm using the word invest loosely. We're not expecting a return. to get these features made, and then can we work with this community to help extend the reach of your product? So we've done that successfully with a product. Oddly, the hardest part was writing the contract and transferring the money, because contracts aren't made for you to invest and not expect something back. You know, like they're mostly made for you to invest and get the money back or get the product. So negotiating with somebody where we're saying, no, you keep the legal IP, you keep the product. If it makes any money in the future, it's yours. No, we don't want the money back. No, there's no interest rate. Was sort of hard for the lawyer. There aren't a lot of contract instruments that let you do that, you know? So it was an interesting process. And then the third way that we build is building these community projects to make the data and the other things that may be necessary to make already existing products work. There are plenty of products that help solve the problem of where a bus is. Their problem was getting the data into those. And that's something we were able to help with. So we helped in that way. And then we work with the actual, getting them out into the world. And for us, that means operating and maintaining them. It means whenever there's a security hole uncovered, we go in and figure out how to work with that and take care of it. It means whenever one of the products that's used in the technology stack is upgraded, when phone platforms upgrade, when browsers change, we make the appropriate changes. So it means taking care of the tech. It also means that we have a help desk, so when users forget their passwords, they send us an email, and we give them new passwords. And when people need to be signed on or supported or get advertising material, we do all of that. It means that we stand behind tables at conferences, and we talk about what the product is to people that might be interested in using it. So it's all of the parts of getting it used and having impact. In some cases, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, it also means doing fairly rigorous third-party evaluations to understand what change they're making. Not in every case, but in some cases. So I'm going to stop there. That's what our process is, and see if there were more. And there were a couple of questions along the way, but I think it's a good point for you to intervene with my English and make sure that there are, if you guys have questions or any part of that process you want to know more about.
Do you have some roadmap? To go back to process and check if something is wrong in this step?
Yeah, that's what we do. Yeah, that's what I mean with operating it is we do all of, if we put it out in the world and it's a product that we take care of it, and are the product owners. So absolutely. And we continue to seek funding for them to keep them operational.
And you're using some pricing business model for that the people must pay for that, or it's always for free?
Yes and yes. So I'm smiling because I'm glad the time zone has shifted. So the business model we aspire to is that grant dollars pay for all capital investments and improvements. So grant foundation dollars pay for the initial development of a product, and they pay for significant version changes as we go forward. And users pay the day-to-day operational cost. So a grant investment for us is like VC money that we don't have to pay back. So we can keep the user cost very low because they don't have to pay back the initial investments to develop the product. They just have to pay for the investments to keep it going. So they said that's our ambition. Because the fact is, with a couple of the products, we've been successful enough in grant raising that it's been the right thing to do to keep it free for the users, right? They're users that work in a very, they help domestic violence and human trafficking survivors. It's extremely under-resourced. Like we shouldn't make them pay for something just because we could. That said, at some point, some of those users probably will have to pay, but we'll have to figure out a way to help them, to help understand which users can really support payment in a way that's equitable. And some of the other products we deliberately kept extremely cheap so that they have an extremely low ongoing cost so that we don't have to charge users because we don't think it's the right thing to do. And we have two other products that are just at the point that do make much more sense to charge users. They're not in that same cash-strapped kind of environment. We're unlikely to get that same kind of long-term grant investment. And you can see a clear model for charging them for the operational expense that works. So in that case, we have tiered pricing. But they're both just in a place where it's the right thing for us to start having those conversations. We're also pretty committed with some of our products, particularly the Safe Shelter Collaborative and 4 Bells, to keep it free for the first 100 users forever. Because those users committed to us when we were trying something new. And we got as much from them, like their usage gave us the information we needed to make new versions of it, to go get other funding. We already got a lot of concrete value from their participation. And so they deserve something back from us for that. They took a bet on us. You know, other users are coming onto a system that's been shown to work. It's a little different. Other questions for this?
A jeśli nie macie pytań, to może jakieś komentarze też jak najbardziej zapraszamy.
Będą przykłady.
Na przykłady czego?
Aplikacji właśnie, które przeszły ten proces. Do you have some examples of the application which
Went through this process. So actually to talk about your products, yeah?
Yeah.
Also.
Yes.
The products are
I do. So are you guys ready for me to start talking about what we've made with this process? All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. This is the easiest one. The one I said that we deliberately kept super inexpensive.
It's really easier.
Yeah, it's super simple. Just a small R. Everybody, if you need an R, you can just take your phone out and show it to other people. It's excellent. Translates well. So this is the one that I said that we kept deliberately inexpensive to keep the cost as low as we could. It's also one of the first products that we made. So this is how we start talking about all our products. We start by talking about the problem and then what the solution is and what we hope the impact is. So the problem. In the United States, there are just under 100,000 public schools. During the school year, those public schools serve free or reduced price lunches to roughly 30 million students, right? Public school in the United States runs, in general, from early September until early June. So what that means is all those students that are getting at least one meal a day for free at public school, Monday through Friday, during the months when school's not in session, they don't have the same kind of place to get food. During the summer, for every 6 kids that are eligible for meals, on average, one is accessing. Right? So this is a problem because it turns out that they're still hungry during the summer months. You know, it's not like hunger goes away because school's not open. And it can be really hard to find. There are roughly 47,000 places in the United States that over the course of summer will serve lunch. So less than half the number of schools, right? They're not all open at the same time. That's the total number of sites, but some are open for 1 week only out of the whole summer. In large cities like where I'm from, they change locations. They're not always in the same place, so it's super hard to find. And you often don't know where they are at the end of the school year. So students leave and they haven't decided where all the locations are going to be at. So you can't just hand people a list. So, you know, the problem that we approached was what can we do to help students access these food resources during the summer months, to just be able to easily find them. The ones that are open, because who cares that that's going to be open in 3 weeks? It doesn't help, you know, at 11 o'clock on this particular day. So we made this really simple product called Range that helps youth find a summer meal. It works. It's exactly how I found a coffee shop here. In a city I don't know. I open the app, I'm the blue dot, the red dots are coffee shops. In Range, you open the app and all the pinpoints show you places for free meals are being offered at that particular time. Then you can go in and tap on one and you can see details about its hours and some other information about it. Directions. You can add it. The people that we target with this product aren't the youth itself, because we think there's something maybe a little not appropriate for us to reach out to youth in this position. They're vulnerable. They should be connected by people that have the social service and other resource skills to help them, which is not us. So instead, we've made this app for like librarians and outreach workers that are police officers even that are in contact with youth that are likely to need food and supportive services. But they probably don't know where all the places, because they're outside of that system exactly. So there are also some things that allow you to email it to somebody or send the list to people via text message. We get the data from the federal government. The federal government sponsors those 47,000 sites, so we can be confident that they're really operating, because it's not like we can go around the whole US and check, right? So we're confident that they're really operating, that they've had some safety standards, and that they're appropriate places for us to be sending youth to. We also decided, after we operated it for a year, like one of the things we heard back is youth need other kinds of places to hang out too. And so we put all of the country's libraries in, because libraries are places that youth can go during the summertime when they don't have another place to go, and they can access a lot of programming and supportive materials. At the beginning of last summer, there were just over 2,000 downloads. We found one of the school districts in a major US city, all of the school, not just one school district, many school districts, they all had a message about this app on their website during the summer. So we can see that it's like people are knowing about it, and we can see it being used. The impact, we have no idea. You know, I'm gonna be like super honest. We know it's being used. We know people download it. We know if educators and school officials didn't think it had value, they wouldn't put it as part of their summer website. So we see things that tell us it's not doing harm, for sure. But there's no sign-on. We don't know who's using the product except for standard analytics. We don't know how, because if the second we put in sign-in or all those other things, we just increase the cost of the product a lot. And maintaining it, then we have privacy things that we have to worry about because we have user data. And we didn't want any of those things for this product. We wanted it to be as simple as we could be. And honestly, to go pay an evaluator to do an evaluation would cost more than the product itself cost. And that makes no sense to us. So we're not doing that kind of evaluation. We're satisfied with being able to see that it's being used, being able to see that people that are in a position to know whether it's helpful or not are promoting it. And then sometimes we see somebody specific sharing it on Twitter or on Facebook or something like that, and we'll call and do informational interviews with those people. But that's not the same thing as, so we feel confident it's doing good. That's not the same thing as knowing what the impact is. We do think it's good at helping people find emerging and transient resources. So one of the things that we've experimented with is a version that shows where all Brazilian libraries are, their hours, right? Because it was easy for us to test. If you were to open the app right now and scroll over to the city of Diffa in the Republic of Niger, which requires a lot of going like this across the world from the US, right? It would show you all of the water tanks in that city, because somebody from the UN called and said, hey, could it show these kind of resources that aren't quite mapped the same way? And we were like, let's try, because we knew it wouldn't be confusing. No kid in the US city of Chicago is going to go like, I'm going to try and go there for lunch. You know, like that's just not, and nobody in Diffa is going to go, okay, the water tank's there. You know, like that wasn't going to happen. So we didn't have to worry about confusion in the product. And then when it worked, we like left it in there. We can see there are a couple users. We don't have the data updated or anything. We're super interested in, can we turn this into some kind of rapidly deployable version that can be used in a crisis? So I want to say that what we're more interested in the app here, because we made this app a pretty long time ago now, 4 years ago, I think, There are easier ways to do it now, including uploading a spreadsheet to OpenStreetMaps or Google or something like that, right? Like, you can put it on some of the data platforms like Socrata and make this map. Like, I could do it with a spreadsheet. You know, you don't need you need to be a good user, but you don't need to have any real technical skills. So I think the app is less interesting in this form than it used to be. I think what's more interesting is the decisions about what is a valid resource that goes into the app and how do you scale that. Like, that's like the hard part. And so we're interested in taking some of what we've learned about that and applying it to other projects. We did come up with this concept of using it for support of Syrian refugees when the crisis was a couple years ago, very beginning, particularly in Germany. Because, you know, what was happening is that nobody knew who was serving the refugees because nobody had been doing it 2 weeks ago, right? It was emerging, it was figuring it out. Once it stabilizes, you don't sort of need this kind of product quite as much. We've also talked about applying it to things like like we have a lot of kind of mobile services, like maybe a dentistry that's in different places that people with different income levels can access, or like there's a lot of asthma to check kids and test them for asthma or do vaccinations, like those kind of services that aren't in a static place all the time. They're not in the same place, and it could be useful for some of those still. What we found that was useful about the app was interesting. It gave people a way to talk about and communicate the issue to folks that didn't understand it inside the United States. So there were people that sort of never thought about, I didn't think about it until we started digging in. Like, I didn't go, gosh, wait, where do those kids eat lunch during the summertime? You know, I knew about the programs. They started in the 1940s in the US. But I sort of never thought that as our school system changed and we stopped having summer school, that one of the big impacts in communities was youth stopped having food. Like educators were worried about stopping summer school in the US because it was stopping learning, but also it was stopping feeding. You know, and sort of, it's not something, it's obvious once somebody tells you, but it's not something you come to naturally. So the app became a way for communities to have conversations about the issue and to talk about the resource. And that was an interesting outcome for us that we didn't necessarily expect. The Safe Shelter Collaborative, so the problem that's addressing is one of sustainable housing for domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, and how do we help all survivors. So on one day in the United States, approximately 6,586 people will call and ask for shelter in a domestic violence organization and be told no, because there's not enough room, because there isn't a space for them. Maybe they're a person with children and this shelter doesn't serve children. Maybe they have a 14-year-old son. Most shelters won't let a male that old in. You know, there are a lot of reasons a shelter may not work for a specific person, right? It's not just about the availability of the bed, though that's often the most important thing. So we started thinking about how do we bring resources together to solve this problem. And our response was something called the Safe Shelter Collaborative, which has three components. One, we're bringing together organizations that provide sheltering services to human trafficking and domestic violence survivors, and helping connect them to trainings offered by subject matter experts that give them capacity to offer more sheltering services to more survivors. Two, we build technology that maximizes their ability to find space in open shelters. And three, when no sheltering space exists, we provide a way for people like us to get a notification on our phone and make a donation and pay for a hotel room for the person in need. So what that looks like in practice is that once an organization has been accepted into the collaborative, which is a process. We don't let just any organization in. We have to be confident that they are really providing sheltering services to domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, right? So they go through a little bit of an onboarding process. Once they come in, let's imagine for a second that I'm an organization, you come to me looking for shelter. You guys are other organizations. You guys in the back are individual donors out in the world. you have good jobs, a phone in your pocket, and a philanthropic heart. And so you come to me, you need shelter right away. It's absolutely obvious. I can't help you, right? I have no space for you. So I turn on my computer, I log on in my browser to the Safe Shelter Collaborative, and I put in 10 pieces of information about you. None of them are your name, your exact age, who you are. There's no personally identifiable information. It's that you're a man, it's that you're in this age range, that you appear to me to have no substance abuse issues, that you've experienced a certain kind of trauma. So they're like those kind of questions, right? And I hit send. And immediately, all of you in the front rows that are other organizations, you get notifications that somebody needs shelter. You can get it as a text message on your phone. You can get it as a phone call to any kind of telephone, to a landline or a cell phone. You can get it as an email. If you wanted to, and we prepared you for it, we can turn the light bulb blue. Anything I can send a text message to make react, I can make a notification. When we do the G-Wiz demos, we do actually turn lights colors, which is pretty fun. And you can immediately go and log on, see those 10 things about the person, and say, no, I can't help, I don't have space. Or you can say, hey, you know what, put me in touch, because maybe I can. So what's happened is a process that used to take a week is taking about 6 minutes. Because the process used to work like I couldn't help you, and so I started calling all of you one by one. Except I don't get a hold of you. You're busy. You don't answer the phone. So I hang up. I leave you a message. I call you. While you're on the phone, you call back. And you say no. You know, I make you retell your story to every person I get a hold of before they say no. So, you know, within 2 hours, you're sick of it. You've told your story. It's a traumatic, horrible story. I can't help you. Like, it's an awful situation, right? So it's made that a lot easier. But too much, the answers that we get back in those 6 minutes are no's. Because nobody has space. There isn't enough space. Or there are none of you for me to ask. I live in an isolated, more remote part of the United States, and there aren't any other shelters. I'm it. I find out the available space by turning around and looking. There's nobody in my area, a rural area. In that case, using that same system, I can send out a request to the people in the back of the room, our willing donors, and their phones buzz, and they can make a donation to me in an amount that I've specified that covers a hotel room. So I can turn around and put this individual into a hotel room to give them safety and shelter while we're working out a longer-term solution. So right now, there are 105 agencies in 11 U.S. states in this system, and they're being supported by just under 1,400 community members, people that put the app on their phone and make donations. In practice, like in most things, 10% of those folks are making the donation. Right? So we have the same rule that a small number of the community is the most active, so that's certainly true here. Collectively, they've placed more than 712 requests for shelter-based space, and they've received roughly $37,000, or yes, for hotel rooms.
And that's over a period of
4 years. The first year and a half of this, we worked only with one organization, very slowly, because it's like if we made a mistake sending a kid to the wrong place for lunch, they're mad, right? The place was closed when it shouldn't have been closed. This is a much different situation, you know, and we wanted to have a lot more confidence in the system, and not, this is a place where tech, it's not the tech, right? It's the business process and working with the shelters, and are we able to do this safely? And, you know, so there was a lot to it. We were learning a lot about how to develop and test these kinds of products, right? Which isn't just a technical problem. So we really ramped it up a lot. You know, most of the activity has occurred in the last 2 years.
And what is the number of people who are in need of shelter?
Well, in one day in the United States, there are over 6,000 unmet requests for shelter. It's hard to tell what that number translates into. One, that's only domestic violence survivors, not human trafficking. We don't have a good number for human trafficking survivors. Two, I could be one person, but be 20 of those calls. I could also be one of those calls, but have my 3 kids with me. You know what I mean? So it's hard to tell what it means in numbers, and how many of those unsatisfied people are gonna also call the next day. How many will never call again because they couldn't get help on the day that they did. You know, because it takes a lot of guts to make that, a tremendous amount of guts to make that phone call. And yeah, so we don't have good numbers, but we know it's a big number. So the impact of this one, we do know, because this is a place where there is a huge value in having a third-party evaluator come in and evaluate. We could see that, like in the other one, we could see that the technology is working and people are asking, but we don't know if there are unintended consequences happening out inside the community. You know, are people going into hotels and then just leaving and never getting the other support services that they need? Is it, oh, excuse me. Is it stressing organizations out because all of a sudden they're able to provide more shelter, but they don't have more of all the other services that they need to offer those people, right? Like we didn't know those things, so we had grant funding to work with a third-party evaluator. We found that all of the participating organizations would recommend it. So that's a great sign that it's having a positive impact and there aren't unintended consequences. 75% reported that their placement time had been reduced significantly, particularly for clients that are traditionally hard to place, which means people with kids, men, people that are transgendered. Most agencies reported that they expanded their referral network. So this was an interesting outcome that we didn't expect. But whenever the method for me finding shelter is that I call, when I'm calling, I call you because I like you, I know you, we've worked well. I don't know you, I've heard some weird things about your organization, so I'm not going to call you. You I actively do not like, because we were on the opposite side of an agreement around a grant with a funder, and I'm still carrying that, you know? And so I don't call you at all. But the system doesn't discriminate like that. The system's sending the note out to everybody equally. So all of a sudden I find out that your organization actually does help people that I wouldn't have guessed you helped. You know, and so, you know, it changed how they saw their collaborators in different ways. And so that was an interesting thing. It was not something we expected. And these are a couple quotes from folks, right? This is quite long, but it's you know, they had a transgender client and they found shelter. The person only had to tell their story once. To me, one of the most awful things about this situation, other than the fact that it just exists in the first place, these people sum up this tremendous amount of courage. They're in huge danger. They walk in to ask for help. They're having an awful, awful day, and they have to retell their story over and over and over and over. And it is an awful story in which they're afraid they're going to be killed. You know, like that's the end, is that this violence has been perpetrated against them, and they have to keep justifying their need, right? And so for somebody to just have to do it once is a tremendously positive outcome. This is somebody talking about streamlining their work. And then we're seeing that organizations are able to use the hotel rooms to manage their shelter population. So you'd asked me before if we saw instances where technology is not the only solution. I mean, technology isn't the only solution. It's facilitating what's happening here, but a lot more has to happen here, and it has to happen in the organizations and in the communities. We're interested in the idea of bringing this general concept of, you know, finding out what the need is and broadcasting the need and having people respond to it instead of inventory, like all of you keep up to date how many empty spaces you have, which like does not work. We're interested in bringing that to other kinds of situations, anything that's capacity limited.
I do evaluations in slightly different contexts. My question is perhaps a bit technical, but when you did evaluation, is it all self-reported, or did you actually base it on data that you were sure that reflected reality?
Because of the kind of project it is, we worked with somebody that has a particular degree in the United States called the Masters of Social Work, because this is a social work project, and she was licensed. So she was a trained evaluator and also had the kind of social work licensing, so that they could go out and she could evaluate and study. So we had a combination of data she was able to work with. She was able to work with the data in the product, a little bit of comparables to other similar sized communities. there isn't wonderful tracking of exactly how much need it is. We couldn't do that kind of test very well. She based it on a variety of interviews and prepping technique. We did not talk to any survivors because to be able to do that, you have to have a different degree of clearance. Mm-hmm. Like it has to get reviewed by a peer board, and it's sort of we don't work with the survivors directly. So survivors, the people being placed in shelters, may never know that this exists. So it was a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. There are places where the quantitative data is lacking for good reasons. We didn't talk directly to the survivors. And this was only done a year after, so we don't know, we don't have any data about what longer term impact it may have had on the survivor, that they got housing quicker. I think it is a hard thing because in our system, we don't actually know who the survivors are. So we don't want to know who the survivors are. We don't want any personally identifiable information about them in our system, because then that system becomes vulnerable to other kinds of information, problems.
And then you had something like 75%, I don't remember what it was exactly, but was this self-reported or based on the data that you probably couldn't do, it's impossible to do an RCT,
this was reported on self-reported data. Mm-hmm. So we didn't do strict tests to say like let's not help you with the transgender client and see how long it takes, and then let's help you. So they're able to self-report, but everybody in the field this resonates as accurate. I mean, generally we have good quantitative data that says how much time it takes now to get the answer, and it's mm-hmm. such a big difference that it's stunning. So it almost doesn't matter how exact the other side is.
And that could be really impressive, like before, this is how much time.
Yeah. But the time before was 1 to 2 weeks, mm-hmm. depending on the client. So when you talk about 6 minutes compared to 1 to 2 weeks,
oh, that's super impressive.
You know what I mean? So we didn't worry as much about getting that data with the rigor, because it puts the baseline data, because it put a burden on the participants that was too hard for them to track exactly how long with each kind of client, and then for us to do all that, it just wasn't.
I was just wondering if
yeah.
you had some sort of a system that actually tracked it. And my original question stems from the fact that I'm thinking, just wondering to what extent evaluation in civic tech differs from other fields, and I'm thinking well, it's all about data, and perhaps it's also a way to help the organizations being more data-oriented, evidence-driven.
Yeah, so we had good data for what the system does. We have good qualitative data for what it does before. We didn't have that in quantitative because they don't have the systems that capture it. Mm-hmm. We have started asking new organizations when they come on if they have that data, so they can report before they start, so that we can try to get at some of that numbers, but most of them don't know exactly, and it's a big fat it depends, because it's wildly different. If I have a woman and I'm a shelter that serves a woman and I have an empty bed, it takes 0 amount of time. But if somebody comes in with 5 kids, those can take 2 weeks. Right? Because that's a much harder problem. So anyway, it just...
There are ways to tackle that.
There are, but that's not what the organizations are worried about. The organizations are worried about helping.
Rather than...
Yeah, exactly. So for us to ask the questions that would allow us to tackle that problem, they would be like, and I'm not signing up for your system. So Four Bells is about deploying skilled volunteers. So communities often depend on skilled volunteers, especially in times of disaster. You know you're going to need them, but you don't know exactly when or where. It might be people with specific construction skills. It might be doctors. It might be people with specific kinds of legal assistance. The example we often use for this is staffing a suicide prevention hotline. So when you're staffing a suicide prevention hotline, it can often be staffed by volunteers, but they have to be trained. Right, to have gone through this process. It can be fairly rigorous, and that's who's volunteering. So we have our suicide prevention hotline. We have our volunteers staffing it. Somebody gets a terrible case of the flu. They call in. They can't come in today. I have to find a replacement, but I can't just ask the whole world. I have to ask this pool of trained individuals. This tool helps you with that kind of a situation. So what we've made is something that allows you, you know, if you've ever paired a Bluetooth keyboard with a computer, you know, the computer will give you a code and you type the code into the keyboard and that's what pairs them, right? So it's kind of how it works. The organization gives a volunteer a code, they put it in and it pairs them. It pairs the volunteer and the organization. Now I know that you've gone through my suicide prevention training, right? And you're going to get requests from me. So whenever a need comes up, I say, oh my gosh, this person called in sick. I go in, I add a task, I say what the task is and what time I need it. I send it out to the volunteers that have gone through this training, right? And they can look at the task and they can accept it or decline it. They can say, oh, I can do that. And the advantage is as soon as they accept it, nobody else can accept it. So you don't end up in the situation that happens when they're using Facebook and text messaging and email where all of a sudden you end up with 4 people there. Because people don't bother to say yes, they just go, right? And you don't get back in time, or you end up with nobody. And you end up with this sort of mishmash that takes a lot of time to support. And then you have people continuing to answer your request for the next 2 weeks, because they're just seeing the email for the first time. And so that's what this helps with. It works a lot like any other ticketing system you've seen. It's been downloaded 866 times, mostly inside of the United States. One of the biggest uses that we're seeing for it right now, one of the biggest groups that's using it right now is an organization that provides legal support to human trafficking survivors. They know that these survivors are going to need legal support. They don't always know what kind. Maybe they need support around immigration issues. Maybe they need support around Good Samaritan and safe harbor laws. Maybe they need support around child custody laws. They could need all kinds of different legal support. So you know they're going to need it, but not exactly when. You want to make sure it's really a lawyer. So it's a great tool for that kind of use. You can match it up when it's available. The impact, we aren't sure. We've just gotten a larger grant for this to allow us to work with our partner in Colombia and bring the project there and translate it into Spanish. That's also going to give us both more users and more resources to actually do a proper evaluation. And when I say we aren't sure, I mean it the same way I meant it before. We're getting good feedback from the case studies and the use of the pilot, but we haven't done a more rigorous analysis to see what the impact is in longer term. And then the last thing we've made is something called Worker Connect. This is being used in Qatar. They're building all the infrastructure for the World Cup. You have a big engineering firm at the top, and they've subcontracted and subcontracted and subcontracted and subcontracted until you get to the person that is a man from another country that's doing the physical labor, right? And so they have a lot of laws that govern the treatment of these individuals. The engineering firm wants to make sure that everybody wants to make sure that the worker is treated well. This tool gives the worker an ability to go through and in a structured way anonymously report on an issue. The issue can be about food, dignity and respect, their recruitments, getting paid, health and safety. It can be a variety of things. Qatar is an extremely hot country. There are laws about water breaks when temperatures get to a certain level. These are migrant workers almost exclusively, I think actually exclusively, that are living in these camps while they're doing the work. There are laws about internet connections. There are laws about how many workers are allowed to be in a one room, one sleeping room at a time, like all of those kinds of things, right? So this gives people an opportunity to report on those issues. It also provides them with information about their rights. So because we have this structure for reporting, it can say, well, this is what your rights are about this. This is what else you can do. You can, if you want, just press a button and put in a little bit, or you can provide more information. We've been piloting it in a pretty closed pilot. And so they report on it, and then appropriate executives in the engineering firm can look at these anonymous reports. We don't know who the person is, right? And there are people that can work and identify hotspots and intervene whenever it's appropriate and necessary. So they can see the reports by categories as made-up data. They can see the reports by category, you know, and dig in and see some of the specifics. So they were able, like almost immediately in the pilot, to identify, for example, one, like I think it was a community room that didn't have, the internet wasn't working, it had been broken for a while. And they're supposed to have internet access in all of their rooms. So they were able to identify that and go in. You can understand why workers, you know, would not necessarily report that issue. They want to keep their jobs, you know, it's not the most important thing in the world. They're sending money home, but they have these rights and they should be able to access those. And then there are also, of course, more sophisticated problems that can arise that are different in their impact on a worker than that. So during beta testing, migrant workers made 137 reports in their chosen languages. The app has 7 languages in it. It's based on the language that the workers speak. You know, this was interesting because we did a very different, we weren't going there and having them draw on sticky notes and hanging posters up and having people vote. But we did a lot of work with focus groups with workers that had returned to their home country and said, well, what would you like? So we had to approximate what the worker wanted because it's not an environment that you're going to go in and do like, let's do an innovative community design process. Like, it's not the environment or the society to do that kind of work. So the impact, again, literature, we're just now at a spot where we've done a pilot, we're getting good reports back, we have a lot of confidence in the product, so we're just now at the spot where we're hiring an evaluator to do that. This is another case where this project is worth the evaluator. In that it's a big project, it can have significant consequences, it's had a lot of investment in the product itself, there's a lot of moving parts to it, a lot of things we can't see outside of the technology, so getting the evaluation helps us really understand what's happening. What we are finding that it's good at is helping people report anonymously on conditions. And it's interesting because we think the special thing about this product isn't anonymous reporting. There are a lot of ways to do that. We think it's the structure for reporting your issue so that it helps manage reports and keeps your anonymity. And also the connection to educational information and other resources that can be supportive to you. Honestly, what we're most interested in right now is getting funding to deploy a version of it to report on voting issues during the upcoming U.S. midterm election. Because we think there could be a combination of factors that could lead to different types of voter misinformation and intimidation. And it's a contentious election. And so, so we think this could be a good tool for that. And it's well suited to provide educational information to. Those are the things that we've made. And that's how we've made them. Yes?
So all of this application answers to very different problems. Tell us something about communities that you were designing the applications and how you came up with these problems.
Sure. So we didn't come up with the problems the communities did through the process that I described. We focus on the issues, which is, you know, the broader category. We're particularly interested in, as an organization, in issues that relate to food, shelter, physical safety, and safe work, and work with dignity. Just because there's a lot of need there, right? And that already holds a lot of problems, and it's pretty baseline needs for people. And so we're particularly motivated by those, so you see that reflected in the projects that we work on. So it's part that, right? It's part what we're interested in, and then it's also part our what people will fund, right? So we can be interested in a project and we think the voting project is a great, interesting project, but if nobody funds it, it would be hard to do.
How much are these? How much do they cost, including your costs?
Sure. So the Safe Shelter Collaborative, we've had about $2.5 million worth of investment in that, right? That pays for the technology, it pays for our training, it pays for maintaining it, it paid to offer expert training to the organizations, it pays to staff the help desk, right? It pays for the web servers that have to run everything and the data, right? So it's a significant, it paid for the evaluator, you know, so it pays for the marketing and outreach, like all of that costs money, right? The range cost about $12,500, right? The first 4 bells, we've had about $200,000 worth of investment in it, but a huge part of that was an in-kind investment from a development organization that wanted to do a CSR project and did the first version of it. The project in Brazil, it was a $600,000 grant to do 2 years worth of work in 2 cities. So it included our work doing the community facilitation and then working on making the products.
So, what's your theory of change? Because the amounts of money you mentioned are quite significant. So, is the general idea that these products will then be scaled up, adopted, left out there for people to adapt? So, like thinking about the impact.
So it's slightly different with each one. So in all cases, our theory of change is, in general, that if you have a civil society organizations that are connected, it allows them access to more innovative solutions. I use a Safe Shelter Collaborative as an example. So that only works because the organizations have reliable technology and they're connected to the internet, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work very well. And so that's always the first step. And TechSoup does a lot to make sure that happens, right? And then the second step is that when we're able to connect them together with efficient and frugal uses of innovative technologies, which may not be advanced technologies, it may be innovative uses of technology, right? That they'll be able to do their jobs faster and more efficiently, which in the case of the Safe Shelter Collaborative can literally save lives. So getting somebody into a shelter today instead of tomorrow can save their life. You know, so that's hard to prove, but over time we'll have enough statistics to be able to prove it. We know that people get killed when they don't go into shelter, but we don't know how many. It's not something you can track very well, and so we expect it to have that kind of an impact. You know, Worker Connect is different because it doesn't depend on civil society organizations in the same way. So the theory of change for that one is a little bit different, but it's still, in general, this basic thing that connects people and give them the ability to make their needs clear and have a path for them where they can get met. That whatever need they're seeking, it's going to help make them better. And what we're interested in is giving people a path to get their needs met that give them more choice and control over their lives. You know, so that's what we're very focused in on. But like when you get specific and we start saying these outcomes and these users, of course, it's very different for range than it is for the Safe Shelter Collaborative. So there's that part of the theory of change, because we want to be responsible that we're never doing a project to prove a point, but we're doing the project to help the community that needs it. The other part is we're looking at what we can learn from these projects so that we can understand what part of it can be made into a platform and used more broadly, which may or may not be scaling up, right? We think there are 2 parts, well, there are 3 parts, I guess, of scaling up the way we think about it. One is getting more users and more people helping and using it, right? It's about number and size and the system that supports that. The other way is about making it available in another country, which can often require more than translation because there are other specific considerations that you have to take into account. And then the third way is there an opportunity to turn it into a platform so it can actually not just be offered in more places to more people, but in more issue areas. Like, will that way of solving the problem work for other things? And if so, what? So we think like the Safe Shelter Collaborative in that way has a lot of potential. We think Voter Connect has a lot of potential, but it has more legal issues and informational issues whenever you cross issue areas and when you cross national boundaries. It's like worker rights laws just change one country to another. So you've got to change, the content has to change at minimum.
I assume that you will stay with us for a moment so we could also ask questions
Absolutely.
more individually, yeah?
As long as they're in English.
We can also,
sorry that that's the only language I
we can also help with some
yeah,
translations.
of course. I was making fun of myself.
So I wonder if we come to the point to switch into direct conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I have a couple of announcements. So
Go.
thank you very much,
You're
but we continue. Thank you. First logistics, but then I also would like us as a community to get to know each other better, so to introduce each other, and I hope that you will also stay longer and but will come more often. Concerning the logistics, the toilet is just straight there, the great door you see when you go straight. Don't shut the door behind yourself when you leave, because then the next person will need the magnetic card, which is on the table usually. But if you don't shut it, then we don't need the magnetic card when it's open. If you shut yourself inside, don't worry, there is a bell, you can just ring. Yeah, this one, yeah. But you don't need it if somebody doesn't shut the doors. Okay, there is water, like the small tap, it's mineralized water. There's coffee, tea, so help yourself, feel like at home. Like it's self-service, so you can find some mugs on the shelves or clean some. And then, of course, if today you will, there will be too many people talking to Marnie, or you will get your questions later, not today, you can always get back to us at TechSoup. Caravan Studios are a part of TechSoup, and we are in touch with Marnie. We had a lot of interesting discussions here during this her stay in Poland. So we'll be always happy as TechSoup to provide you more information about our